This podcast is brought to you by Spotify for podcasters. Have you yourself ever wanted to become a podcaster? Well, Spotify makes it simple and easy to do so. You can record, edit, and even distribute your podcast straight from their app. The best part? It is absolutely 100% free. Visit their website, podcasters.spotify.com, for more details, and download the app on your Apple or Android devices today to get started on your podcasting adventure. That's Spotify for podcasters. What is going on, everybody? Travis Fowler, Harkrider, back again this week with another edition of the Four Corner Podcast. So you know what that means? It's that time again. Let's talk pro wrestling. This week was actually fun. It was a good go-home show, at least when it came towards building up for Backlash on the SmackDown side of things. But also it was the conclusion of this year's WWE Draft, which we'll get into deeper thoughts about the draft here in just a little bit. But for overall viewing, it really didn't change a whole lot when it came towards excitement for the brands, which I think is kind of the little disappointing factor on the draft. Again, we'll talk more about that in a minute. But the exciting part was some of the NXT call-ups that me personally I'm looking forward to. So aside from the draft concluding, along with the final go-home show on SmackDown for Backlash, which was held in Puerto Rico, and that was an amazing show. Backlash as well, which we'll talk about here in a minute since it happened last night. We'll talk a little bit about that. And overall, the Puerto Rican shows were just absolutely on fire all show long. From a simple SmackDown to last night's Backlash, that crowd was into it, especially when you had hometown people or familiar faces that are from either San Juan or just Puerto Rico in general. They were really excited about it. The Puerto Rican crowd was just electric, and it made for such an exciting viewing pleasure for us as fans. So that was an amazing go-around for the WWE. And then on the Impact side of things, as you've heard me say, I'm a big Impact fan. This week we saw the main point of the debut of Trinity, and I do still believe it's going to be a great career rejuvenation for her. As somebody who had been in the WWE developmental system basically her entire career, she didn't really have a whole lot of knowledge, or maybe didn't even think about what life would be like outside of the WWE wrestling bubble, if you will. So to those people that also keep hating on her for going to Impact, myself along with several other people of the IWC have pointed out several of the following. Impact has made and rejuvenated other stars in the past. You ever hear of a guy named AJ Styles? How about Bobby Roode? Oh, both those guys are Impact originals back when they were TNA. Samoa Joe, even though he made somewhat of a name of himself in Ring of Honor, he really didn't hit his global recognition, at least in my opinion, and I could be wrong about this, until he landed on TNA. And maybe that's just stateside, but he's another name that you can chalk up to be an Impact original or TNA original. Drew McIntyre, who was going by his real name of Drew Galloway when he was released by WWE back in the mid-2010 era, he rejuvenated his career through Impact as well as the indie scene as a whole. You also had guys like Bobby Lashley, who weren't necessarily utilized appropriately near the end of their WWE tenure, find a second home in Impact. He's another example of somebody who turned themselves into something to watch thanks to Impact Wrestling. So if you are on that side of why did she go to Impact, you might want to actually tune into the shows, because as I've said for weeks on end, I even have been tooting this horn actually for a year plus at this point. Impact Wrestling is a great show for professional wrestling, and as a whole, professional wrestling is doing wonderful. On the AEW side of things, they obviously had their ticket sales for Wembley over for All In London taking place, And man, they have had some incredible numbers. We'll dive deeper into the Wembley situation in a minute, because on Dynamite, the main focus was what the main event for Double or Nothing was going to be. I called it, and I think many others called it, especially after we had that promo battle with all four of the pillars for AEW in the ring. You could kind of see where the writing on the wall was, and it definitely showed Las Vegas Double or Nothing Fatal 4-Way. We got that confirmation through the tag match, which was a great way to intertwine things for the overall storytelling. Speaking of storytelling, they hired Will Washington, who is a reputable, I believe he was an interviewer for some websites at one point in time, and he was hired to kind of keep long-term stories on track. I think he's also going to help when it comes towards making sure things seem logical as they continue on that long run. So props to AEW for addressing maybe what I feel their glaring issue was when it came towards professional wrestling, at least stateside, was the lack of long-form storytelling. And I think that is exactly what they are looking at doing now. So props to them for doing that. Also in AEW, we saw the Outcasts look like they were about to accept a new member into their group, and that would have been from Shida. I'm glad this was a swerve, because honestly, when that was going on, I was like, well, this doesn't make any sense. Like, Shida made her name, at least on the stateside level here, thanks to AEW. So I would classify her as an AEW original just as much as you would Britt Baker or Jamie Hayter. So I'm glad that ended up being just a swerve and a tactic, because I would have questioned some of that booking if they would have actually stuck with that, of her joining the Outcasts. Adam Cole had his program continuing with Chris Jericho. That's leading to Cole and Jericho at Double or Nothing. You can just see that coming. I honestly have to say I'm very pleased with what AEW has been doing overall. You've got me invested, especially in the Four Pillars match, Double or Nothing. The Cole Jericho match is interesting, but I can't sit here and tell you that I'm like overly excited for it, but that may change. I know Jericho's going to deliver, and Cole, he delivers as well. So I very much look forward to that. In the same breath, we also saw the in-ring debut for AEW of Roderick Strong. He showed up last week and helped out Adam Cole, which was amazing that everything stayed so hush about his debut, which we talked about last week. We saw him actually do his thing, though, and it was cool to see. So professional wrestling as a whole is on fire right now, and it's great. As a longtime professional wrestling fan, I love seeing all this. So this just means great things to come, and overall, it's a great time to be not just in the wrestling business, but to be a wrestling fan. Now, let's talk about AEW's Wembley situation, because so many people doubted that they were going to only sell X amount of tickets. And in the pre-sale, they had already hit close to 60,000 tickets, I want to say, and that was even before general admission went on sale, which I believe that took place on Friday. So I think right now the overall is 60,000, and maybe I have my numbers wrong about what had been sold already in pre-sales. Maybe it was closer to 40,000. But either way, the fact that right now AEW is doing 60,000+ fans in Wembley Stadium in London is an absolute success, not just for pro wrestling, but strictly for AEW as a whole. This company is still, remember, just a very infant company. They are just barely 4 years old. And for them to be, in my opinion, they'll sell out Wembley. If they open Wembley Stadium up to the full capacity, I don't think it's too far of a stretch to say that they can sell that stadium out. They're so close to already hitting that mark. I believe the capacity is around 80 to 90,000. So if they're at 80,000, only 20 more thousand seats to go. If they've surpassed that 60,000 mark, and then if it's 90,000, you sold 2/3 of your seats for that show already. So overall, Wembley Stadium is going to be an absolute success for All In London. Keep in mind, not a single match has been announced yet. So I wonder how they're going to play off with AEW All In London with AEW All Out the following weekend. Only time will tell, since that's going to take place at the end of August, beginning of September, but I think we have a big week from that time of AEW All In London to AEW All Out is going to be quite the time for All Elite Wrestling. On WWE, we had the announcement of how a new world champion was going to be crowned for the Raw brand. And the way it is being laid out is 2 triple threat matches on both Raw and SmackDown next week, where the winners of those 2 triple threat matches will then go on to face each other later on in the same show. And then the winners of those 2 one-on-one matches will then face off in Saudi Arabia at Night of Champions to be the new World Heavyweight Champion. I've seen people complain about this whole situation with SmackDown being involved, and they're like, well, we just had a draft. Why are we even doing this? Why is SmackDown even involved? And while I can see where people are arguing that they shouldn't even be in the conversation, considering it's now a Raw exclusive title, per the announcement of Triple H stating that where Roman Reigns goes, that's where he and the titles stay, and the world title would be represented on the other brand. I understand people's frustration, but I think people also are forgetting they're not saying that SmackDown's going to be involved with the World Heavyweight title overall. But if in story, and maybe reality as well, Roman Reigns did negotiate fewer wrestling dates, fewer title defenses with him holding the titles, you do really leave a lacking and glaring hole for one side of your roster, that being the SmackDown roster. So why not give somebody an opportunity to become a world champion on that brand? And it's a very simple explanation as to what happens if the person on the blue brand were to become the world champion. They would just get back over on Raw. It's that easy. It's not hard to figure out. So I think people need to lay off the world title situation a little bit because, again, this is all just in story. It's part of professional wrestling. So just enjoy it. Enjoy the matches. Enjoy the fact that we have a new world title that's going to be defended on one brand very regularly. So I know it's hard to do overall because I've been guilty of it in the past too, but to the IWC, let's not complain as much and let's just enjoy the ride and see how everything unfolds. Now, in the overall draft for WWE, I mentioned this on a short earlier this week. It was pretty lackluster because not a whole lot of big names switched brands. A lot of people actually stayed on the same brand that they were already competing on a regular basis. So not real different in terms of who went where. You had some notable changes like the whole faction of Imperium going to Raw, which I am more than okay with. Bobby Lashley going over to SmackDown was actually a big surprise there. LWO as a faction is going to be over on SmackDown, which, by the way, I feel like WWE is starting to become pretty faction heavy. Judgment Day is going to be over on Raw. And then we can only talk about some of the NXT call-ups. Apollo Crews is going to go back over to Raw. JD McDonough is going to be on Raw, which I cannot wait to see him in action. And I really do hope the rumors that we have seen that's been heavily discussed backstage of adding him to Judgment Day actually comes to fruition. Because I think it would be a perfect fit for JD. It just kind of makes sense. Even though I know what the JD stands for, as most of us do, it just makes that much more of a fun comparison with JD McDonough since he is Finn Balor's actual protege and Finn trained him. Bring him into the group as kind of like a insurance policy, knowing that Finn's always got somebody that he can rely on. And then the JD part of it just kind of goes right into it. You know, Judgment Day McDonough sounds pretty fun to say as a nickname every once in a while too. So there's that prospect. Over on the SmackDown side, we had the current NXT Women's Tag Team Champions, which I can't wait to see how they're going to figure this out. They got drafted over to SmackDown. I love the team of Isla Dawn and Alba Fire. I think they are going to do great over on the SmackDown side. And as a whole, I think they'll do well for the Women's Tag Team title division since they have operated on an actual team. And speaking of an actual team, Katana Chance and Kaden Carter also were drafted over onto the Raw side, as well as the, at the time, reigning NXT Women's Champion, Indy Hartwell. So both those were good pickups also for the Raw brand, which I forgot to mention earlier. But for me personally, SmackDown picking up Cameron Grimes was a great win in and of itself. But for me, I think you're really about to see someone flourish on the main roster from NXT. That being Grayson Waller. Grayson Waller is a heat magnet. To me, he's almost like a new age version of The Miz. He can just get the crowd to hate him so easily. And it's going to be fun to see what he does over on SmackDown. Give him a little bit of time, and especially if they turn LA Knight face eventually, a LA Knight versus Grayson Waller feud, trust me, you got a little glimpse of it back when NXT originally switched that 2.0 multicolored version on the blue brand as a main roster feud. Their promo battles could be epic along with their in-ring work as well. So big things to look forward to on the NXT representatives for the draft as well. But as a final note, let's talk about Backlash last night. And we've already mentioned it a little bit, so we won't go too much in depth with it. But man, for a PLE that I honestly didn't think was going to be a good one, they pulled it out. Like, overall, the Backlash pay-per-view delivered. And I just messed up there. I called it a pay-per-view. Most people still do. I can't get used to saying PLEs, and I think everybody else kind of feels the same. But we'll get around to it eventually. The premium live event, the PLE of Backlash, was an overall fun show. From the start match, which arguably was the best match on the card, Io Sky and Bianca Belair freaking killed it. Also on the women's side, I know the match was shorter, but it still was a fun and entertaining match and a heartwarming match for Zelina Vega. Her and Rhea Ripley had a good match. It was what it was supposed to be, and they delivered on their front as well. My only fear now is that we might indeed see the title exchange between Belair and Ripley, since they're both on separate brands and they're holding their respective brands' championships. Unfortunately, it looks like that may be the route we go. You know, I have a better route since we have Night of Champions coming up. How about we just have the two of them face off against each other on like Raw or SmackDown this week or next, and whoever wins, you obviously will win the women's championship, but you'll take the title for the brand that you aren't on, and that title is now forfeited, and boom, you can do a mini tournament again for the women's division of the brand that needs to crown a new women's champion. To me, that's pretty simple, and it's actually a great way to still keep someone established, or you can even have somebody chase the championship as well. So that's just my thought. Take it for what it's worth. Back to the Backlash card. I think the most notable things to talk about from Backlash was the Bad Bunny matchup, which him and Damian Priest absolutely killed. I still have to agree that that probably should have main evented, especially with Bad Bunny being kind of the focal point for the pay-per-view, since he was listed as the host, later turned active wrestler. He delivered again, and it's now got me wondering. I shared something on the 4CP page earlier, and I'll still throw it up here in this. Who do you think's actually the better wrestler between Bad Bunny and Logan Paul? Because both have delivered for WWE over the last couple years. I know for me personally, I think Logan Paul edges out by just a smidge, but both have been phenomenal for WWE, and thank you to both guys who actually, one being an entertainer as in a musician, and then you have another entertainer in the form of a YouTuber. Both have shown that they are fans and they have taken this seriously and delivered. So thank you both for pulling out everything that you have in your WWE 10 years. And then the main event that they tried to say was a double main event, but we all know that that means there's a co and then a main event. That still went to Brock Lesnar and Cody Rhodes. I'm still on the Cody Rhodes bandwagon, and I'm so glad that they're kind of focusing away from the title picture. I hope they still keep him away from the world title picture, because there's only one way to finish his story, and that's by him beating Roman. And at this point, it should happen at the latest next year at WrestleMania in Philadelphia, since it is WrestleMania 40, and hopefully both guys stay healthy to where we could get that if that's the route they're going. But props to WWE for the match with him and Lesnar, because it was a good match. It was a fun storytelling match between Lesnar and Rhodes, And I gotta say, maybe some didn't like it. I personally did. Rhodes picking up the win by being trapped in the Kimura and then pushing Lesnar down for the 3 count was awesome. Like, I thought that was so clever and was actually a realistic ending for the match as well. Brock bled again, and you can't take anything away from Lesnar, who arguably is one of the very best, if not the best, at selling and then also giving when he needs to as well. So both guys delivered where they did. The surprise returns also while they were in Puerto Rico, that of Carlito and Savio Vega especially, was exquisite. Loved it in the Bad Bunny match. The LWO was on fire for that area. Like, literally everybody ate them up. It would be very interesting to hear what they did in merchandise numbers for LWO down there for the show. Hopefully we'll hear about that later this upcoming week. But guys, that's actually all I got for you this week, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. What did you think of the draft and Backlash overall? What's your thoughts on AEW's All In London? You let me know what you're thinking down in that comment section below. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, like and share our videos all over social media. Make sure you're following us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And again, I'll be back next week to talk more pro wrestling with you guys. But until then, have a great week ahead and just continue to love pro wrestling.